If you are trying to learn a language but you're forever struggling with time, then this video is for you because I have 10 study tricks that you can start using immediately just to get up and started, to get going with your language learning, and they only take 5 minutes each. I use these tricks when I'm traveling, distracted or tired, and they work with any language. So let's get you started. So first thing to say is if you only have 5-10 minute gaps in your crazy busy schedule, you've got to pounce on those gaps, claws out. You don't think a panther has all day just to stalk its prey, right? Well, maybe it does, but a panther doesn't have deadlines like you do. So you've got to actually aggressively take advantage of these 5-10 minute gaps that you've got in your day because they really add up over the course of a day and a week and a month. Treat these gaps as a real opportunity, legitimate study time, and use them to get that study time in every single day. See, when you have a big task ahead of you, like learning a language, it's easy to find reasons why you can't do it, why you don't have time. But one thing that I always do when I'm trying to get started with anything big is actually to restrict myself to 5 minutes. I'll literally say to myself, right, Ollie, you are only allowed to study for 5 minutes here, no more. And this is a kind of reverse psychology trick that always works to get me started because we've always got 5 minutes, right? Ever heard the story that it takes 21 days to form a habit? Well, I'm afraid that's a myth. The real science says it takes 66 days. But if you add up 10 minutes a day, then after 66 days, that's 11 hours of study. That's a lot. Your brain will start to get hooked, which is decent progress for someone who has no time. And what's the best way to get to day 66? Of course, you start on day 1. Now, music is one of those things that however tired or busy you are, you can always kind of find time to listen to music, right? It doesn't feel like work. It is actually the easiest way to get some exposure to the language you're learning in your dead time when you're traveling, waiting in a queue, even getting dressed, you know. If you're on the go, if you're in the car in a check-in line, whatever you're doing, instead of watching people or worrying about random stuff, put on some music on Spotify or YouTube music. And there's no need to try and understand every word either because music really never really feels like study, but it does give you valuable exposure because it is in the language. The point is that you're giving yourself exposure to the language, and it's something very important to do every day. Because until you start getting that daily exposure to a language, the language is always going to feel a little bit distant, like you're looking at it through a pane of glass, you know? The language is always going to feel like something you're doing rather than actually becoming. You know, when I've learned languages, I've always learned songs. Half of them are on YouTube. I've recorded videos and stuck them up. These songs tend to stick with me for years, which says something about the power of music to actually stick in your brain. It's a great language learning tool. And on Spotify now, most songs also have lyrics with them. So if you're listening to a song in French, swipe up, you're actually going to get the lyrics there for you to read along, which is a great way to actually sync up the music and the study. Flashcard apps on your phone were built for this, so fill up those dead minutes with a flashcard session as often as you can. Flashcard sessions on your phone can fill up your empty time spaces really, really easily. And whatever you think of flashcards, there's no doubt that it's a quick and simple way to directly drill language that you've been learning into your brain, and you can do it anywhere. So first, make sure you have a flashcard app installed on your phone. I've used an app called Flashcards Deluxe for over 10 years. It's brilliant. It does the job perfectly well. The most important thing about flashcards is to make your own. Make them originally yourself. You're going to be inputting the words into your flashcards. So whatever you've been studying, whether it's reading books or listening to podcasts, take the vocabulary that you want to remember and make your own flashcards from it. But rather than putting single words into your flashcards, which I see people do sometimes, I recommend putting in complete phrases because it helps words stick more. It's an entire unit of meaning, which makes words within phrases easier to remember. It's counterintuitive. You think, well, why would a phrase be easier to remember than a word? But because it means more, and phrases have rhythms to them, they have anchors, beginnings and ends, they do tend to stick in your brain a lot more easily. Whereas a single word has no context, it has no anchor. You might be able to remember it for a second, but it will quickly slip out of your brain later. Most of all, do not use pre-made flashcard decks from somebody else. Reviewing vocabulary that you've learned yourself from a book or a movie or whatever is always going to be beneficial, but reviewing vocabulary that someone else has selected for you is pretty pointless and it's unlikely to stick because it has no meaning or relevance to you. So please make your own flashcards, guys. And to keep it sustainable as well, don't make too many. Just add 2 or 3 phrases here and there from your various activities. That is plenty. If you have flashcard decks that get too big, you will just end up getting overwhelmed and give up. Quick question for you. Anyone know the best way to practice speaking when there's no one to talk to? We'll find out later in the video. But for now, please like and subscribe if you're finding this useful. I have lots more cool ideas to share with you, and it really, really helps the channel.
Scusa, sai dov'è un negozio che vende pittura qui vicino?
Certo,
C'è un negozio proprio dietro l'angolo.
Now, when did you last listen to a dialogue, people speaking in the language that you're learning? Now, unless you're in a country where that language is spoken, it's pretty hard to eavesdrop on conversations. That's why recorded dialogues are great. And the ideal time for listening to dialogues is during your dead time, whether you're on a train or in the car or whatever. Now, in the last point, we talked about flashcards, and the big danger of flashcards is the risk of learning stuff that's not relevant to you. So you've got to start with material that is relevant and interesting to you, and then put that in your flashcards. But there's no point memorizing a bunch of words if you don't know how to use them. And so dialogues are a great place to start because it's language in context. It's people speaking about stuff. It also gives you the opportunity to hear how pronunciation works too. And dialogues are exactly the kind of thing that you can usually listen to in just 5 minutes. I have a series of books here, 101 conversations in different languages. They're entirely in dialogue format, which makes them quick and easy to digest. And they come with audio versions too. Links in the description if you want to check those out. We have them in many different languages, many different levels. The point is, it's a story, it's in dialogue format, it's easy to digest, so it makes it that kind of language material that you can easily use in the gaps in your day, however busy you are.
J'habite en France. Bravo. J'habite en Belgique. Super.
Now, if you happen to spot me wandering down the street, chances are you'll see me muttering to myself, talking to myself, and you'll think I'm completely weird. But self-talk is brilliant. You only need yourself for this, no apps. It's a great way to kind of check in with yourself about what you have learned. You spend hours learning lots of phrases, listening to how they should sound, and so what's the next natural step? Well, you've got to practice the stuff that you've learned. Now, of course, self-talk isn't quite the same as real conversation, but it does help you to kind of process the things that you've been studying. And practicing saying things out loud is super useful because remember, to actually speak, to learn to speak another language, there's an element of training your mouth, the muscles in your mouth to actually produce the right sounds. Just like anything new that your body learns, there's muscle memory involved in getting fluent. And self-talk is a really convenient and available way to develop those muscles and the habit of forming words within your mouth. Honestly, self-talk is a fantastic daily habit. I do this all the time. I'm in the car, if I'm driving, and usually what I do is just kind of random stream of consciousness. I just practice telling the fictitious person in front of me what I've done with my day, what I have for breakfast, whatever, however mundane. And it usually is super mundane, the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. But ultimately, speaking is speaking, whether there's someone in front of you or not. And it makes it so that that day that you do come face to face with a native speaker and you want to practice speaking the language that you're learning, you won't be completely unpracticed. Your mouth will be prepared. You'll be, ready. However busy I am, there's one thing that I always make sure I do in my week, which is to get a couple of speaking practice sessions with my tutor each week. Speaking practice is just too important not to do. Now, I know, it's one of the hardest things to make happen, to actually book a time. But what I do is I book a time, I schedule it in at a time that I know I'm going to be able to do it, and then I meet my tutor and I practice speaking the language. Do you know, one of the most common complaints I hear from students is that they can get 10 out of 10 in a test. If they're speaking to their teacher, they seem to be able to speak well, but as soon as they actually have to talk to someone in an unplanned way, they kind of fall to pieces. And the thing that I explain to them about language learning is, if you want to get good at speaking, there's only one thing that you need to do, and that is to practice speaking. It sounds super obvious this, but people somehow expect to just get good at speaking by studying. But it doesn't work like that. There is no kind of magical transformation where knowledge in your brain comes out of your mouth. There's a process involved where you actually have to practice speaking, and that has to do with processing the language in your mind and actually getting it through and out your mouth. It has to do with the mouth muscles and practice forming the words. But it also has to do with learning to react to a native speaker. If they make a gesture or ask a question or ask for clarification, you've got to be able to react to that. So for all these reasons, actually practicing speaking a lot is the only way to get good at speaking. Now, this is a video about 5-minute habits, and it probably hasn't escaped your attention that booking a session with a tutor takes longer than 5 minutes, and you would be right. However, I've included this because if you're packing your week full of fantastic 5-minute habits and you're doing nothing else, the one thing that you should add on top of that will take longer is a speaking session, simply because it is most people's goal to become good at speaking. So if you can find time to do one thing that takes more than 5 minutes, make it speaking sessions. And even if it's just one a week, that adds up over time. I get all of my one-to-one practice from LanguaTalk because they have by far the best teachers in my experience. And it makes it so that I'm making good use of my time because the teachers are quality. There'll be a link to LanguaTalk below in the description. Definitely check them out if you're looking to get more speaking practice in the language you're learning.
Georges, quel chemin on prend? À gauche ou à la droite? Je préfère le chemin de gauche. Et moi, je préfère le chemin de droite.
Il était une fois un homme qui vivait en France. Cet homme était très vieux. Le vieil homme s'appelait Arthur.
Carlo e Susanna salgono sulla barca di Peter il Kraken. È una barca molto grande con tantissimi cannoni. One of the habits that I always see successful language learners do is they always got a book with them. Whether it's a newspaper, a book of short stories, or a novel or something, they're always carrying around reading material with them. Depending on the level they're at, it could be an actual book for native speakers, or it could be something designed for learners, but they're always reading. Why? Because you know those 5 minutes I mentioned? They have a way of showing up in the strangest of places, and you can read a single article of a newspaper or a single chapter of a short story in one session. So, for example, in my books of short stories, this is the intermediate French one, so it's a bit longer. You know, you can just read one chapter of the story. They're pretty short. You can read them in one session, maybe a couple of 5-minute sessions, and then tomorrow you can just carry on. And as long as you're reading at the right level for you, it'll take you just as long to read that chapter as it would to drink your coffee. I actually have a colleague here at StoryLearning who has a habit of reading our books of short stories on the plane just before taking off, and for some reason it calms their nerves about flying. For me personally, I'm usually just trying to get the attention of the cabin crew so I can order a whiskey before we take off, but whatever. Short stories, they work too to calm your nerves. Of course, there are lots of other kind of books out there. Short stories are good because they're short, and so it's a study format that makes it convenient to learn. And it's really important when you're choosing resources that you don't just pick some random thing off the shelf. You think, what am I trying to achieve here? And if my goal is to actually study in short 5-minute chunks, then short stories or something like that are actually quite conducive to actually making me be able to do it. One of the big mistakes that people make is going to reach for a novel in the language and then get surprised when they can't make it past page 1 because it's just too hard. So anyway, reading, carry books with you, fill those 5-minute chunks with reading.
Dans le sud-ouest, on va dépasser localement les 35 degrés du côté de Bordeaux ou encore à Toulouse.
Now, I am not the biggest fan of TV for lots of reasons, especially for language learning. But if you're going to watch TV, at least watch in the language that you're learning. The news, the weather, a cool TV series, all of it, doesn't matter. After all, we can't deny that TV plays a part in kids learning their native language when they're growing up, right? And many other cultures as well that have English subtitled TV learn to speak great English as they grow up. And in my book, that is no coincidence. So it can certainly be beneficial, especially when you watch hundreds and hundreds of hours. So how can TV be helpful? Well, if you watch regular programs like a specific series or even the weather every day, you're going to hear very specific phrases that come up over and over again because you always hear them in context with visuals. So you are likely to learn something from that. But what about movies? I'll be honest, I don't find watching foreign movies to be the most effective way to learn a language either. It's just too cumbersome from a study perspective and often quite unnatural language as well. But it is useful at the end of a long day when you're too tired to do anything else. And it can certainly help you get used to the sounds and rhythms of the language as well. Again, TV and movies is the kind of thing where to get real benefit from it, you've just got to devote hundreds and hundreds of hours to it, and that's the reason I'm not such a big fan. But how can you watch a movie in 5 minutes? This is a video about 5-minute study hacks. Well, in my experience, people who say that they have no time to study also somehow manage to watch quite a bit of TV. It's a big mystery. Something to think about.
はい、今すごいいい感じのお花を見つけました。沖縄特有のお花なのかはわからないですけど。
What is your favorite thing to watch on YouTube apart from this channel, obviously? Is it Mr. Beast? Is it comedy? Is it travel shows? At the moment, I'm working my way through Uncle Roger videos. For me, this is what YouTube was made for. But when I've had enough of him, I tend to watch videos in Japanese.
日本人がこう潜在的に美味しいっていう感じる要素っていうのは多いんじゃないかななんていう。
Now, a cool trick here for language learning is to create a totally new YouTube account. You can do it using the same email address and only click on videos in the language that you're learning. So if you're learning Japanese, with this brand new fresh account, only click Japanese videos. Make sure you don't click on anything that's in English. And what will happen is that YouTube then will only recommend you content in that language. And if you make sure that you only click on stuff that you're interested in, it becomes a really useful organic content recommendation engine that doubles as a language learning tool. And so whenever you have those 5 minutes free, what you can do is switch your YouTube account into that specific new account that you've created and then just watch a video in that language. You're going to be interested in it because the algorithm has already learned the kind of thing that you like. There are some really awesome YouTube channels out there in other languages, not specifically language learning channels, but say if you're learning Italian, channels in Italian for Italian people. It just often takes doing some digging and discovering them, but you can find stuff you can get completely addicted to that function as a really good language learning tool. There's also cool software out there like Link and Fluent that kind of sync up with YouTube and help you study with those clips too. And it really works to watch videos in other languages, because if you discover 2 or 3 channels that you really love and you can replace your English watching habits with content in the language that you're learning, then it can really start to form a habit change that can go far beyond the 5 minutes that it takes to watch one single video.
全部都湿了，身上也全部都湿了，头盔、眼镜、帽子。
Now, watching videos is a pretty passive experience with language learning, but it is an easy way to relax and get some exposure in at the same time. Most likely, you're probably going to go on for longer than 5 minutes, but that means it's working, it means you're hooked. But just like with movies, don't make the mistake of thinking that TV time is actually useful study. It's a useful activity for a bit of extra exposure, but it's no replacement for actually studying the language if you're looking to improve. Mush mush. Now let's say that you like a little bit of a challenge and you don't necessarily want the translation of something you don't understand straight away. Well, instead, you could press this button and have it spoken aloud right there and then on your phone. Alternatively, for languages like Japanese and Chinese, you can press this button to have it transliterated so you can actually see what's been written spelt out in Roman characters. Then, if there's something that you want to say but you don't know how, you can use this one-touch translate button to actually write something in English and then send it to someone, to your exchange partner, in their language. Now, whether you like it or not, you probably spend a substantial amount of your day sending instant messages back and forth. So why not do some of that in the language that you're learning? Luckily, we are in the 21st century, and if you look on an app like HelloTalk or Tandem, you can find a language partner that you can text whenever you have a moment. With apps like this, you do tend to have to put in a bit of legwork to find people who are serious and willing to be language partners. But once you find someone who's good, it's a fantastic way to practice. And it's good practice for writing the language because you get a real response from a real person, ideally also correcting some of the mistakes you've made. But even if they don't, it's just natural interaction. It's also a cool way to find out how native speakers actually talk with each other too. And remember, it doesn't have to be text either. In fact, sending voice notes back and forth is a great way to practice speaking when you don't have a whole 30 or 60 minutes to devote to language practice with someone. I know it sounds simple, but it all adds up. And the great thing about instant messaging is you can do it whenever you have a little space.
친구가 연습 중이라서
친구가 안 잘한다.
그게 바로 내 친구예요.
친구 못돼요. Whisper, that's creepy.
Sorry, 친구 못돼요. 그래서
Now, all of this might sound like a lot to do, but of course you don't have to do all of them. Simply pick 1 or 2 things that you think you might enjoy and you think you might be able to keep up. Because if you do keep it up and you add together all of these 5-minute language study sessions, then it really adds up to something substantial, especially if you can make it become part of your normal day. And the way that you win is that you start to feel like you own the new language and you're actually using it as part of your real life, not just in study mode the whole time. You will see amazing progress from this. But before you get started, you should definitely check out this video over here, which YouTube is absolutely convinced you're going to love.